The day Choi Yoon got on his knees, he had nothing. No money. No plan B. No safety net. Just a dream so big it scared him, and a woman kneeling right beside him, because she refused to let him face that moment alone. Charlotte Antonio was 7 months pregnant. Her back ached. Her feet were swollen. Her grandmother, Miss Delphine, had been asking questions about the future all week. Quiet, worried questions that Charlotte kept answering with smiles she had to practice in the mirror first. But that evening, in the small living room of their rented apartment in Detroit, Michigan, Charlotte watched Choi Yoon spread papers on the coffee table and explain, for the third time, why this was the only way. The cartel, and yes, that word alone should have stopped everything, was offering a business loan. Not a bank loan. Not a government grant. A loan from people who did not send reminder letters. People who did not extend deadlines out of kindness. People who came to your door. The opportunity Choi Yoon had found was real. A commercial distribution deal with a rising food logistics company out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The numbers made sense. The returns were projected to triple within 60 days. He just needed the startup capital, $250,000, and he needed it fast, because the window was closing. No bank would move that fast. The cartel would. Choi, Charlotte said slowly, you're asking me to put Grandma Delphine's property on the line.
Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Here we give you the best of stories. Sit back, enjoy, and watch to the end.
Just as collateral, he said quickly. We'll never actually lose it. The business pays out in 2 months, Charlotte. 2 months. That's all. She looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who had held her hand through every single prenatal appointment. Who had painted the nursery twice because she changed her mind about the color. Who had never, not once, made her feel like her dreams were smaller than his. She believed him. That was the thing people never understand about moments like this. It wasn't stupidity. It wasn't weakness. It was faith. The kind that grows in the space between two people who have chosen each other. And Charlotte Antonio had chosen Choi Yoon with everything she had. So she signed. Her name on that document wasn't just ink. It was her grandmother's house in Inkster, Michigan. It was her unborn child's stability. It was her own future, folded up and handed over because she trusted the man kneeling beside her on the floor. Choi Yoon held both her hands after she signed, and he looked at her with eyes so full of something that felt like forever. 2 months, he said. I'm coming back in 2 months. We get married. We raise this baby together. We pay back every cent and we never look back. I promise you, Charlotte. I promise. She nodded. Maybe she cried a little. Probably she told herself this was the beginning of something beautiful, not the end of everything she knew. The cartel representatives, 3 men in expensive suits who had arrived at their apartment in a black SUV with Grand Rapids plates, left with the signed documents and transferred the funds within 48 hours. Choi Yoon was on a flight to Grand Rapids by the following Tuesday. And just like that, he was gone. At first, the calls came every day. Then every other day. Then twice a week. Then once. Then not at all. Charlotte had their daughter, a girl she named Seo-Yun Antonio, because she wanted the child to carry both sides of who she was, in Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak, Michigan, on a Tuesday morning in February. Cold outside. Snow piling up against the windows. Grandma Delphine held her hand because the man who promised to come back never did. She tried calling him. The number rang out. She tried his email. No response. She contacted the logistics company in Grand Rapids and was told that Choi Yoon had completed the distribution deal, collected the full payout, and relocated. They had no forwarding information. He had made his money. And he had walked away. The cartel did not care about her grief. They came to her door, politely at first, then less so, and reminded her that the debt was still owed. $250,000 plus interest. She was the guarantor. Her grandmother's property in Inkster was on the line. Charlotte was 26 years old, 3 weeks postpartum, holding a newborn, and staring down a debt that would take years to clear. But here is what Choi Yoon never counted on. Charlotte Antonio did not break. She got a nursing certification, then a full nursing degree, taking night classes at Wayne County Community College while Grandma Delphine watched Seo-yun. She got a job. She started paying. Slowly, painfully, month by month, she chipped away at that debt like a woman carving her own way out of stone. Meanwhile, somewhere far from Detroit, Choi-yun was building an empire. He had taken that first payout from the distribution deal and reinvested it fast, into shipping, logistics, import-export operations, and eventually into things that were far less legal and far more profitable. He was smart. Frighteningly smart. Within 3 years, he had connections across Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois. Within 5 years, he had the kind of money that makes people nervous. Within a decade, the name Choi-yun meant something in certain circles. Something people said in low voices. Something that came with a warning attached. He had a penthouse in downtown Detroit. Contacts in government offices. A reputation that kept most people far away and brought the wrong kind of people close. He had built everything he promised Charlotte they'd build together. He just built it without her. Back in Inkster, Charlotte had kept Grandma Delphine's house by the skin of her teeth, negotiating, pleading, working extra shifts, doing things she never imagined herself doing just to keep her family's roof over their heads. Seo-yun was growing up quiet and observant, the kind of child who noticed everything but said little. She had her father's sharp eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw. She had never met her father. Charlotte never told Seo-yun the full story. Not yet. The child knew his name. She knew he was Korean. She knew he had left. But Charlotte had not yet handed her daughter the weight of that full history, because some weights need to wait until a child is strong enough to carry them. Grandma Delphine, now in her 80s and moving slower than she used to, sometimes watched Charlotte get ready for her hospital shifts in the pre-dawn dark and said things like, "Baby, you are carrying too much." And Charlotte would say, "I know, Grandma, but I got 2 hands. I'll manage." She always managed. She just looked different now. The woman who had signed those papers at 26 with bright eyes and a rounded belly was not the woman pulling 12-hour nursing shifts at DMC Detroit Medical Center. The years had changed her in ways that went beyond tiredness. There was something in her face now that was harder. Not cold, but solid. Like she had been through fire and come out the other side not burned, but forged. She still had the debt. Less of it now. After 11 years, she had brought it down considerably. But it was still there. A chain she carried every single day. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse with a view of the Detroit River, Choi-yun was about to walk back into her life without even realizing it. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Neither did she, not yet, but something was coming. Something that would shake both of their lives down to the roots and force a reckoning that neither of them could outrun. Stay with me. Because what happens next? Nobody saw it coming. Asterisk if this story already has you feeling something, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is a really good time, because we are just getting started. Asterisk. Here is the thing about people who abandon you. They never expect you to still be standing when they walk back into the room. And Choi-yun was about to find out exactly what that feels like. Charlotte Antonio had been on her feet for 9 hours straight when the sliding doors of DMC Detroit Medical Center opened and everything she had spent 11 years trying to forget walked right through them. She was at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor, filling out discharge paperwork for an elderly patient, when one of the younger nurses, a girl named Brixton, barely 22, always distracted by anything shiny or expensive, leaned over the counter and whispered loudly enough for half the floor to hear. "Charlotte, you see that man that just came in downstairs? Security had to clear a path. He's got people with him." Charlotte did not look up from her paperwork. "Brixton, I need you to check on room 312. "I'm serious," Brixton pressed. "They say his name is Choi something. He came in for a private examination. They booked out the whole executive suite on the 2nd floor. Charlotte's pen stopped moving. Just for a second. Maybe half a second. Probably nobody noticed. But something cold and sharp moved through her chest, and she set the pen down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to see. "Choi what?" she asked, and her voice came out steady. Impressively steady. Brixton shrugged. Yoon, I think. Choi Yoon. Why, you know him. Charlotte picked her pen back up. Go check on room 312. But she knew. She knew before she even moved. The way your body knows a storm is coming before the clouds show up, something in the air changes, something in your bones tightens. She had heard that name only in her own head for 11 years, sometimes in anger, sometimes in grief, sometimes just as a flat fact she repeated to herself like a scar she was checking to see if it still hurt. It still hurt. She finished the paperwork. She clocked her mandatory 15-minute break. And then she walked downstairs. Not rushing. Not nervous, or at least, she told herself she wasn't nervous. Maybe she was. Probably she was. But she walked like a woman who had made a decision, and Charlotte Antonio had always been terrifying when she made a decision. The executive suite on the second floor had its glass doors propped open. 2 large men in dark jackets stood outside. Inside, a nurse Charlotte recognized, a senior named Devonta, who handled all the VIP admissions, was moving around with charts and equipment. And in the center of the suite, sitting on the examination table in a tailored shirt with his sleeves rolled up, was Choi Yoon. He looked exactly like the man she remembered, and nothing like him at all. The Choi Yoon she had known was lean and a little desperate, with hopeful eyes and second-hand shoes. This Choi Yoon was polished. Heavier in the shoulders. His face had settled into something composed and careful, the kind of face that had learned not to show things. Expensive watch on his wrist. Hair cut precisely. Beside him, sitting in the chair nearest the window and scrolling through her phone, was a woman named, as Charlotte would later find out, Min-hee. Young. Flawless skin. Wearing the kind of outfit that cost more than Charlotte's monthly salary. She looked up occasionally to say something to Choi Yoon in a low voice, and he would glance at her and respond with a small, automatic smile. Charlotte stood in the hallway for exactly 4 seconds. Then she walked in. Devonta looked up first, surprised. Charlotte? You're not assigned to this. I know, Charlotte said simply, and kept walking until she was standing directly in front of Choi Yoon. He looked up. His eyes moved over her face with the polite, blank expression of a man looking at a stranger. He waited for her to speak, probably assuming she was another staff member there for a medical reason. He did not recognize her. Not one flicker. Not even a hesitation. His eyes passed over her face the way eyes pass over a wall, present, functional, and completely empty of memory. And that was somehow worse than anything else he could have done. Worse than the disappeared phone calls. Worse than the debt. Worse than 11 years of silence. The fact that he looked at her face and felt nothing, remembered nothing, recognized nothing. Charlotte's voice came out very quiet. Choi Yoon. Yes. He said, still polite. Still blank. Detroit Medical Center, she said slowly. You're in the same city where you left me. Same city where I delivered your daughter alone. Same city where I've been paying your debt for 11 years. The room went absolutely still. Min-hee looked up from her phone. Devonta froze. The 2 men outside shifted. Choi Yoon's face changed, not with recognition, not yet, but with something cautious and controlled. His eyes narrowed slightly. He was calculating. She could see it happening behind his face, the way a machine starts running when you press a button. I think, he said carefully, you may have me confused with someone else. Charlotte Antonio, she said and watched his face. There it was. Just a fraction of a second, a crack in that composed mask. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened. And then, so fast she almost doubted she'd seen it, the mask came back down. I don't know you, he said. You signed documents with me, Charlotte said, her voice rising now, not with hysteria but with 11 years of compressed truth finally finding an exit. You made promises to me. You took my grandmother's property as collateral for your loan and you left. And I have been paying that cartel back, month after month, while you built all of this. Security, Choi Yoon said, not loudly, but with the calm authority of a man who had given orders for years and always had them followed. Her name is Seo-yeon, Charlotte said, louder now, because she could hear footsteps coming down the hall. Your daughter's name is Seo-yun. She's 11 years old. She has your eyes. And she has never met you because you made a promise and then you decided it was easier to disappear. 2 security guards entered the room. Choi-yun turned to them and said, with the measured concern of a man performing worry for an audience, "She came in without authorization. She's been making accusations. I'm concerned for her state of mind and for everyone's safety here." Charlotte looked at him. Just looked at him. And the thing that broke her, not visibly, she kept her face still, was how smooth it was. How practiced. How easy it was for him to take the truth she was speaking and flip it into something that made her look unstable. Devonta was already backing away, looking uncomfortable. Min-hee had her phone up now, recording. The security guards were on either side of Charlotte, hands near her elbows but not touching yet, waiting to see what she'd do. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She didn't give him the scene he was probably hoping for so he could point at it later. She looked at Choi-yun one more time and said, very quietly, "You are going to regret this." Then she walked out. Not escorted out. She walked. On her own. With her back straight and her hands steady. Down the hallway, past Brixton who was watching from the nurse's station with enormous eyes, through the stairwell door, and all the way to the supply closet on the 3rd floor where she had cried exactly twice in her nursing career. Once when a patient she'd cared for months didn't make it, and once right now. She sat on a box of supply packages in the dark closet for 6 minutes. She counted them. 6 minutes was what she allowed herself. Then she stood up, smoothed her scrubs, checked her face in the reflection of the metal shelf bracket, and went back to work. But something had changed. In those 6 minutes in the dark, something that had been quiet in Charlotte Antonio for 11 years, something patient and buried and waiting, had woken up. And it was angry. Not the hot, tearful kind of angry that makes people do foolish things. The cold kind. The kind that plans. The kind that is very, very dangerous when it belongs to a woman who has been surviving impossible things for over a decade. Choi-yun had made a mistake today. Not just by failing to recognize her. Not just by calling security. He had made the specific mistake of doing it in front of witnesses. Of recording it through Min-hee's phone. Of letting the hospital staff see Charlotte Antonio removed from a room like a problem. That video would circulate. It always did in hospitals. Someone would send it somewhere. And eventually it would reach people, specific people, who would find it very interesting that Charlotte Antonio, guarantor of Choi-yun's original cartel loan, had been publicly humiliated by the man who still owed that debt through her. Charlotte hadn't planned that. But she was going to use it. She went home that evening to Inkster, sat at the kitchen table after Seo-yun was in bed and Grandma Delphine was asleep, and she opened her phone and found a contact she had not called in years. A number she had kept because something in her gut had always told her she might need it one day. The contact was listed simply as M. Reeves. She stared at that name for a long time. Then she pressed call. It rang twice. And a man's voice, low, careful, the kind of voice that has learned never to say more than necessary, answered. "I wondered when you'd call," he said. Charlotte closed her eyes. "I need a meeting." A pause. Then, "Tomorrow. Same place as before." She ended the call and sat in the quiet of her kitchen for a while, listening to the house breathe around her. The refrigerator humming. The wind against the window. Somewhere upstairs, Seo-yun turning in her sleep. Charlotte Antonio had spent 11 years being the woman things happened to. Starting tomorrow, she was going to be the woman things happened because of. And Choi-yun, sitting in his penthouse across the city with no idea what he had just set in motion, had absolutely no idea what was coming. None. Asterisk if you are invested in Charlotte right now, drop a "she deserved better" in the comments. I want to see how many of you are with her. And if someone sent you this video, tell them thank you because this story is about to go somewhere nobody expects. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Asterisk. Charlotte Antonio did not walk into that meeting looking for sympathy. She walked in looking for a weapon. And what she found was so much more powerful than anything she expected. M. Reeves, whose full name was Marcus Reeves, was already inside when she arrived. He was a tall man, somewhere in his late 50s, with a kind of stillness about him that came not from peace but from years of being in rooms where one wrong move could end everything. He ran the cartel's Michigan operations. Not loudly. Never loudly. But everyone who needed to know, knew. He was sitting at a small table in the back room, 2 cups of coffee already poured, like he had known she would be exactly on time. She sat down. "You saw the video," she said. Not a question. Marcus Reeves nodded slowly. Min-hee posted it. Didn't take long to reach the right people. "Then you know he's in Detroit." "We knew before you called," he said. "We've been watching Choi Yoon for some time, Charlotte. He's been moving money in ways that step on our operations. The debt is one issue. The interference is another." Charlotte wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Then we want the same thing." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that is not rude but is very, very thorough. "You're not here to ask for more time on the debt." "No," she said. "I'm here to offer you a plan that gets you far more than $250,000 and takes Choi Yoon's entire operation apart at the same time." Silence. Then Marcus Reeves leaned back in his chair, and something in his face shifted, not quite a smile, more like a door opening a crack. "Talk," he said. So she did. Charlotte had spent the previous night at her kitchen table, and she had not slept. Not because she was anxious. Because she was working. She had spent 11 years as a nurse, which meant she understood systems. She understood how things that look sturdy from the outside can collapse completely if the right internal pressure points are hit. She had studied Choi Yoon's businesses the way she studied a patient's chart, looking for the weak spots, the dependencies, the places where one failure would trigger a cascade. She had found 4 of them. His shipping and logistics company, Yoon Meridian Freight, based in Dearborn, Michigan, depended on 3 key contracts with regional distribution hubs. Those contracts were up for renewal in the next 30 days. If the right people whispered the right doubts into the right ears, those renewals would stall. His import operations ran through a warehouse facility in Romulus, near the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. The facility had 3 minor code violations that had been quietly settled before they became public record. If those violations were suddenly not so quiet, the facility would face mandatory inspections that would halt operations for weeks. His reputation, the thing that kept allies close and competition nervous, rested heavily on a public image he had carefully constructed. Charitable donations. A few community appearances. A profile piece in a Detroit business magazine 2 years ago that called him a self-made entrepreneur. If the truth of who he really was started leaking into those same spaces, the image would crack. And the 4th pressure point, the most important one, was his network. The people around him who stayed close because it was profitable, not because of loyalty. People like that don't stay when the profit disappears. Marcus Reeves listened to all of it without interrupting once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You thought about this all night." "I thought about it for 11 years, Charlotte said. "Last night I just wrote it down." He nodded. Slowly. Definitively. "We move in stages. Nothing traceable back to you. Nothing that puts your daughter or your grandmother at risk. Those are my terms." Charlotte had not expected that. She had expected negotiation. Maybe resistance. Not terms that protected her family. She kept her face still, but something in her chest acknowledged it. "Agreed," she said. "And the debt," Marcus added, "is cleared. Effective today. You've paid enough, Charlotte. More than enough." She nodded. Because if she said anything else in that moment, she might not stay as composed as she needed to be. 11 years of that debt, gone, in a sentence. She let it sit without ceremony and moved forward. "When do we start?" Marcus stood up and buttoned his jacket. "We already have." The first thing that happened was quiet. So quiet that even people inside Choi Yoon's operation didn't notice it at first. The 3 distribution hub managers who handled Yoon Meridian Freight's contract renewals each received, within the same week, anonymous but detailed reports about regulatory inconsistencies in Choi Yoon's shipping manifests. Nothing explosive. Nothing dramatic. Just enough carefully placed doubt to make them hesitate on the paperwork. One stalled. Then another. Then the third manager, a cautious man from Lansing named Theodore Birch, decided he didn't need that kind of uncertainty near his facility and quietly declined to renew at all. Choi Yoon's freight operation lost 30% of its active contracts in 10 days. Internally, his operations manager, a sharp woman named Priscilla Sang, raised the alarm immediately. Choi Yoon told her it was temporary. He told her he'd make calls. He told her not to worry. He made the calls. Nobody picked up the way they used to. The second stage hit the Romulus warehouse. A building inspector named Gerald Mott, who had been having a very difficult year and had recently become far more attentive to anonymous tips, received a detailed message about the 3 previously settled code violations at the Yoon Meridian warehouse facility. Gerald Mott was a thorough man. He showed up with 2 colleagues on a Tuesday morning and began a full facility inspection that nobody could legally prevent. The violations were real. They had always been real. Choi Yoon's lawyers had made them disappear once, but they couldn't make them disappear twice. Not with an active inspection in progress and the documentation now in the hands of 3 city officials who had no reason to be flexible. The warehouse was placed under operational hold within 48 hours. Choi Yoon flew back from a meeting in Chicago, one of the few outside connections he still had, to find his facility locked and his import shipments backed up at the airport with nowhere to go. He stood outside the Romulus warehouse in the cold November air and stared at the municipal notice taped to the front gate, and for the first time in years something moved behind his controlled face that looked almost like fear. Probably. Maybe. Hard to say for certain. But it was something that hadn't been there before. He called his lawyer. Then his accountant. Then 2 people he considered allies who had always taken his calls on the first ring. One of them didn't answer. The other answered but was vague, uncommitted. The kind of response that tells you everything without saying anything directly. The third stage was the one Charlotte had thought about most carefully. The reputation. A journalist named Yvonne Darby, who wrote for a small but widely respected Detroit investigative publication called the Meridian Ledger, received an unmarked envelope at her office on Woodward Avenue. Inside was a collection of documents. Business records. Financial trails. A copy of the original cartel loan agreement, Charlotte's name redacted, because Marcus had promised she would be protected, and a clear paper trail showing how the money from that loan had been used to seed what was now a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. Yvonne Darby had been looking for a story like this for 2 years. She spent 4 days verifying the documents. Everything checked out. On a Friday morning, her piece went live on the Meridian Ledger's website under the headline, Self-Made or Crime-Made? The Hidden Origins of Choi Yoon's Detroit Empire. By noon it had been shared 1,100 times. By evening, 3 larger outlets had picked it up. By the following morning, the Detroit business magazine that had once called him a self-made entrepreneur had quietly removed their profile piece from their website and released a statement saying they were reviewing their editorial process. Choi Yoon's phone, which had always rung with the frequency of a man everyone wanted access to, went almost silent. Almost. Because there was still one number calling him regularly. His accountant, Desmond Park, who called 3 times in 2 days to tell him that 2 of his major investors had formally requested to withdraw from their partnership agreements. Desmond was a calm man by profession, but there was something in his voice during those calls that was not calm. Something tight and careful. Choi, Desmond said on the 3rd call, I need you to tell me this is manageable. I need to hear it from you. Choi Yoon hesitated. It's manageable, he said. But even he could hear something hollow in it. Desmond was quiet for a moment. Then, I have a family, Choi. I need to know if I should be concerned. There was no good answer to that question. And Choi Yoon's silence lasted 2 seconds too long. Desmond Park resigned as his accountant by email the following morning. Min-hee, the glamorous girlfriend who had been beside him at the hospital, the one who had held her phone up to record Charlotte being removed by security, had been quiet for days. She stopped answering his calls on the 4th day after the Meridian Ledger article published. On the 5th day, she sent a single text message that said she needed space to think. On the 6th day, her personal assistant called to arrange the removal of her belongings from Choi Yoon's penthouse. She did not explain herself beyond what had already been made very clear by the direction things were moving. Choi Yoon sat in his penthouse on the seventh day after everything began unraveling and looked out at the Detroit River. The same river he had looked at for years from the position of a man who had won, and tried to understand what was happening to him. His freight operation was hemorrhaging. His warehouse was under hold. His reputation was in pieces across the internet. His investors had pulled out. His accountant was gone. His girlfriend was gone. The people he had believed were close to him had revealed themselves to be close only to the version of him that had power and money. He still had some resources, but the trajectory was unmistakable. He was watching his empire fall in real time, and he couldn't find the source. Couldn't find where to push back. Couldn't find the face behind any of it. Because Charlotte had been careful. Because Marcus Reeves had been thorough. Because the whole thing had been built to be invisible from the inside. Choi Yoon called in every favor he had left. He hired a private investigator, a man out of Ann Arbor named Clifton Webb, and gave him one instruction. "Find out who is doing this to me," he said. "I don't care what it costs." Clifton Webb was good at his job, and what he found was going to change everything. Because the answer was not what Choi Yoon expected. Not even close. And when it finally landed in front of him, the name, the plan, the full picture of who had brought him to his knees, it was going to hit him in a place that no amount of money or power could protect. The place where he kept the things he had spent 11 years pretending he'd forgotten. That place. Asterisk if Charlotte just became your favorite person on this entire channel. Type, "Charlotte won't stop," in the comments right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, why? This story is not done, and the next part is the one that will have you replaying it twice. Hit subscribe and stay right here. Asterisk. Choi Yoon had faced dangerous men in dangerous rooms and never flinched. But the piece of paper Clifton Webb placed on his desk on a Thursday afternoon in November made his hands go very still in a way that no dangerous man ever had. It was a single printed page. On it was a name, a timeline, and a photograph. The name was Charlotte Antonio. The photograph was recent, taken outside DMC Detroit Medical Center, probably by someone who hadn't been trying to be discreet about it. Charlotte in her scrubs, walking toward the parking structure, Seo-Yun beside her in a school uniform, the two of them mid-conversation about something that had made Charlotte smile. Choi Yoon stared at that photograph for a very long time. Clifton Webb sat across from him and laid out everything he had found. The meeting at Mercer's Fine Cleaning. The connection to Marcus Reeves. The 4 pressure points, the contracts, the warehouse, the journalist, the network. All of it traced back to one woman who had been quiet and strategic and precise in a way that left almost no visible fingerprints. "She planned every stage," Clifton said. "She knew your operation better than some of your own people did. The distribution contract stalls, the inspection, the documents sent to the journalist, all coordinated, all timed. She didn't just want to hurt you. She wanted to dismantle you." Choi Yoon said nothing for a long moment. His eyes hadn't moved from the photograph. "The child in that photo," he said finally. "How old?" Clifton checked his notes, though the hesitation suggested he already knew and had been deciding whether to include it. 11, he said. "Her name is Seo-Yun Antonio." Seo-Yun. He had not heard that name before. But something about the structure of it, the way it was built from 2 worlds pressed together, told him everything about who had chosen it and why. Choi Yoon set the paper down and looked out the window at the Detroit River. The penthouse felt different now. Bigger, somehow. Emptier. The kind of empty that isn't about furniture or square footage, but about what has been missing from a space for so long that the absence has its own weight. "Is there anything left to protect?" he asked. Not to Clifton specifically. Maybe to himself. Clifton answered anyway, carefully. "The warehouse hold is going to extend. 2 of your remaining freight clients are watching the Meridian Ledger story. If it picks up any more traction," he paused. "Choi, the honest answer is that you're looking at a full collapse within the next 3 to 4 weeks unless something changes significantly." Choi Yoon nodded. Slow. Measured. Like a man absorbing something he already knew was true but needed to hear out loud. "Thank you," he said. "Leave the file." Clifton left. Choi Yoon sat alone in his penthouse with the photograph of Charlotte and Seo Yun on his desk and the city spread out below him and all his carefully constructed power crumbling in every direction. And he did something he had not done in 11 years. He let himself remember. Not the version of the past he had been carrying around. The clean, simplified version where he was a man who had taken an opportunity and moved forward and built something. The real version. The one he had worked very hard not to look at directly. He remembered Charlotte at 26, 7 months pregnant, signing a document she was terrified of because she believed in him. He remembered the way she had looked up at him after signing. Not relieved, not excited, just trusting. Completely and specifically trusting, in the way that only happens when someone has decided you are worth the risk. He remembered making the promise. 2 months. Marriage. The baby. All of it together. He remembered meaning it. That was the part he had worked hardest to bury, that he had meant it when he said it. It wasn't a calculated lie. It was a real promise from a man who had then gotten his hands on more money than he'd ever seen in his life and discovered, to his own shame, that he was not the person he had believed himself to be. He had told himself early on that he would go back. When he had more. When he had stabilized the business. When it was the right time. And then the right time kept moving forward, and the business kept growing, and going back meant explaining, and explaining meant facing what he had done, and facing what he had done required a kind of courage that it turned out he did not have. So he kept building instead. Kept moving forward. Turned the guilt into fuel, and the fuel into an empire, and the empire into an identity, until Choi Yoon the Mafia boss was so much bigger and louder than Choi Yoon the man who broke a promise that he could almost forget the second one existed. Almost. He picked up the photograph again. Looked at the girl walking beside Charlotte. Seo Yun had his jawline. He could see it even in a photograph taken from a distance by a private investigator. She had his jaw and what looked like Charlotte's way of holding herself. Straight, deliberate, the kind of posture that comes not from instruction but from having decided early that the world was not going to make you small. His daughter had grown up without him and had still turned into someone who looked like she knew exactly where she was going. That was Charlotte's work. 11 years of Charlotte's work, while he built an empire he had originally funded with Charlotte's sacrifice. Choi Yoon set the photograph face down on the desk because he couldn't keep looking at it and maintain the composure he needed for what he was about to do. He was going to Inkster. He drove himself. No driver, no security. An intentional choice. Maybe the first genuinely intentional choice he had made in years that wasn't about strategy or profit or positioning. He drove through Detroit in the gray November morning, across the Southfield Freeway, into Inkster, and found the address Clifton's file had listed as Charlotte's grandmother's property. It was a modest house on a quiet street. Well kept. The kind of house that tells you the person living there cares about it, even when caring about it is hard work. There was a small garden in the front that had been put to bed for winter, the soil turned and covered. Wind chimes on the porch that were still in the cold air. He sat in his car outside for a few minutes. Probably longer than he meant to. Then he got out and knocked on the door. Charlotte opened it. She was not in her scrubs this time. She was in a sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked like someone who had been sitting at a table doing paperwork. She looked like someone living a real life in a real house with real responsibilities. She looked at him and her face did not change. Not with surprise. Not with anger. Not with anything visible. Which told him she had been expecting this, or something like it. Which meant she was still 3 steps ahead. Choi Yoon, she said. Flat. Factual. Charlotte, he said. And then, because he had rehearsed a dozen versions of this in the car and none of them felt right, he said nothing else for a moment. She studied him. You look like a man who found out something he didn't want to know. Can I come in? A pause. She stepped back from the door. He took that as yes and stepped inside. The house was warm. Small in a way that felt intentional rather than lacking. Everything in its place, everything with a purpose. There were photographs on the wall near the stairs, and he made himself not look at them directly because he was not sure he was ready for what he'd see. An elderly woman was visible through the doorway of the sitting room. Small, moving slowly, wrapped in a cardigan. Grandma Delphine. She glanced at him with sharp eyes that held 11 years of fully informed opinion, and then looked back at her television without a word. Charlotte led him to the kitchen table. She did not offer coffee. She sat across from him and folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had decided exactly how much of herself this conversation was going to cost her and had already set the budget. "You know," she said. "Not a question." "Everything," he said. "The meetings, the plan, the journalist. All of it." She nodded. "Charlotte," he started. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't start with my name like it's going to soften something. Just say what you came to say." He was quiet for a second. Then, "I came to ask for forgiveness." The kitchen was very still. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that he became aware of the sound of the refrigerator, of the wind chimes on the porch shifting in a sudden breeze, of something moving upstairs. Footsteps, light and quick, a child's footsteps. Seo-Yun was home. Charlotte's eyes moved briefly toward the ceiling and then back to him, and something in her face tightened. "She doesn't know you're here," Charlotte said. "And I'd like to keep it that way for this conversation." He nodded. "Of course." "Forgiveness," Charlotte repeated, and the word sounded different in her voice than it had in his. Heavier. More specific. "You want forgiveness." "I know I don't deserve it." "No," she agreed, without cruelty, just fact. "You don't. But that's not even the thing that gets me, Choi. You want to know what actually gets me?" He waited. "I never wanted revenge," she said. "I want you to understand that clearly. What I did, what I put in motion, I didn't start that because I wanted to hurt you. I started it because you sat in that hospital and looked at my face and called me unstable. You used your power to make me look like a crazy woman in front of my colleagues. After everything." She stopped, breathed. Steady. "I had swallowed 11 years of what you did. 11 years of working and paying and raising a child alone and keeping this house and watching my grandmother get older and doing all of it without one word from you. And I had swallowed it. But that, what you did in that hospital, that I could not swallow." Choi Yoon said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. She was not wrong. She was not even slightly wrong, and he was intelligent enough to know that offering justifications right now would be an insult on top of every other insult. "I didn't come here to get my empire back," he said, after a moment. "I know that's gone. I came because—" he hesitated, and the hesitation was real, not performed. "I came because I needed you to know that I remember. I remember the promise. I remember what you did for me. I remember that you signed those papers because you believed in me, and I repaid that belief by disappearing. I know what I did. And I know that knowing it doesn't fix it." Charlotte looked at him. Something moved across her face, not softness exactly, but recognition. The recognition of a woman who has spent a long time wondering if the person who hurt her ever actually understood what they did. "Do you know what I used to tell myself?" she said. "In those first few years, when Seo-Yun was a baby and I was exhausted and the debt payments were due and I had nothing left, I used to tell myself that maybe something had happened to you. Maybe you were in trouble. Maybe there was a reason. Because it was easier to imagine that than to accept that you just chose not to come back." Choi Yoon closed his eyes briefly. "And then," Charlotte continued, "I saw you in that hospital, with your expensive watch and your girlfriend and your security detail and your perfect, blank face that didn't even know me. And I understood. There was no reason. You just chose." "Yes," he said. "I chose. And it was the worst choice I ever made. I have spent 11 years building something I am not proud of, Charlotte. None of it, not $1 of it, feels like anything now." "It shouldn't," she said quietly. "Because you built it on my back. On my grandmother's property. On the sacrifice of a woman who loved you and believed you were worth the risk." The word, loved, sat between them on the table like something fragile and irreplaceable that had already been broken. Upstairs, Seo-Yun's footsteps moved from one room to another. Charlotte's eyes went briefly to the ceiling again. "She is remarkable," Charlotte said, and her voice changed entirely when she said it. Warmer, fuller, the way voices go when they are talking about the most important thing in a person's life. She is funny and sharp, and she reads everything she can find, and she wants to be a doctor. She has been asking about you more lately. She is 11 now, old enough to want the real story. Choi Yoon's throat tightened. What have you told her? The truth, Charlotte said simply. That her father made a promise he couldn't keep. That it was not her fault. That she is loved completely, by me and by her great-grandmother, and that his absence says everything about him and nothing about her worth. He nodded, slowly, because that was the right answer. He knew it was the right answer even as it cut straight through him. Charlotte, he said, I am not asking to come back into your life. I understand that is not something you would want or that you owe me. But Seo-yun. Don't, she said again, but softer this time. Don't make promises about Seo-yun today. You don't have the right to make promises today. You lost that right 11 years ago, and you would have to earn it back very slowly and very carefully, and that is not a conversation for right now. He accepted that. You're right. She stood up, which was the signal that the conversation was ending. He stood too. The empire is gone, Charlotte said. Not with satisfaction. Just as a fact. The debt that I carried for you is cleared. My grandmother's house is safe. Those were the things I needed. The rest, she paused, the rest I leave to whatever you decide to do with the man you are when you have nothing left to hide behind. He moved toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped. He didn't turn around, because he wasn't sure he had the right to ask her to look at him again. She has your strength, he said. Seo-yun. I can tell. From what you've said. That's yours. That came from you. Charlotte said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, I know. He walked out. Down the porch steps. Past the dormant garden. Past the wind chimes that moved without sound in the cold air. He got in his car and he sat there for a while, in front of the house that Charlotte had saved with her own hands, and he understood something that all the money and power and empire building had never taught him. He had not just lost billions of dollars. He had not just lost a business or a reputation or a network of people who were never really loyal to him. He had lost the only person who had ever believed in him before he was anything. The only person who had looked at him with nothing, no money, no power, no proven track record, and decided he was worth the risk. And the child upstairs, reading her books and wanting to be a doctor, carrying his jawline and her mother's posture, she was the life he could have had. The family he had traded for an empire that turned out to be built on sand. He could not get that back. Not today. Maybe not ever. That was the truth he drove away with, through the gray streets of Inkster and back toward a Detroit that no longer had a place for him the way it used to. Charlotte stood at her kitchen window and watched his car leave. She did not feel victorious. She did not feel relieved, exactly. She felt finished. The way you feel when a very long and very heavy chapter finally closes. Not happy. Not healed. But done. And done was something she had been working toward for 11 years, so she was going to let herself have it. Grandma Delphine appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving carefully, watching Charlotte at the window with knowing eyes. He gone? Delphine asked. He's gone, Charlotte said. Delphine was quiet for a moment. Then, you all right, baby? Charlotte turned from the window. And she smiled, a real one, not the practiced kind she had been using for years. Small but genuine. The kind that meant something. Yeah, Grandma, she said. I really am. Footsteps on the stairs. Quick and light. Seo-yun appeared in the kitchen doorway in her socks, hair pulled into 2 puffs, a book tucked under her arm, looking between her mother and her great-grandmother with curious, sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Who was here? She asked. Charlotte looked at her daughter. 11 years old. Sharp and funny and full of a future that was entirely her own. Nobody important, Charlotte said. And then, because that wasn't fully true and Charlotte Antonio had always believed in truth. Someone who used to matter a long time ago. But everything is fine. Everything is really fine now. Soo-yeon studied her mother for a second with those careful eyes. Then she nodded, satisfied, and moved to the refrigerator like only an 11-year-old can, immediately and completely redirected by hunger. Charlotte watched her and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 11 years. It was over. Choi Yoon had walked into her life with borrowed money and a promise, built an empire on her sacrifice, returned without recognizing her, and left with nothing. And Charlotte Antonio had stood through all of it, every single piece of it, and was still standing, still working, still protecting her family, still raising a remarkable child, still herself. That was the victory. Not the collapsed empire, not the cleared debt, not even the look on his face when the truth finally caught up with him. The victory was Charlotte Antonio, in her kitchen in Inkster, Michigan, watching her daughter eat leftover food from the refrigerator and knowing that everything she had built with her own 2 hands was solid, was real, was hers. Nobody could take that. Not a mafia boss. Not a cartel. Not 11 years of struggle. Not anything. And that is the story of the man who said he'd come back for her and her family, and lost everything because he lied. If Charlotte's story moved you, if it made you feel something real, drop it in the comments. Tell me what hit you hardest. Was it the hospital scene? The kitchen confrontation? The moment she smiled at the end? I want to know. Asterisk. And if you watched this whole thing and you're not subscribed yet, come on now. You know you belong here. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because the next story on this channel, it is going to hit different. We'll see you there. Asterisk.